Hi again, I'm John Nielsen with Wing Chun Hall, here to discuss Wing Chun, your best self-defense option. Search Wing Chun websites and books and you will find nearly all refer to the Wing Chun Centerline theory. Most present two-dimensional images of people with lines drawn on them, a list of targets, and a short set of instructions. Despite this universal interest, you will not find universal agreement or a comprehensive theory. However, the message is mostly this. All people have a centerline. This line is very important, so you need to attack your enemies and protect your own. From its inception, Wing Chun was presented as a scientific approach. Naturally, adherents want to maintain that connection to science. However, simply borrowing words from science doesn't make your effort scientific, and misapplying those words is exactly the opposite. Admitting the existence of a line, followed by advice on the use of that line, may include some science, but it doesn't constitute a theory. Let's consider a couple of famous theories. Copernicus' theory of heliocentrism from 1543 posits that the Sun is the center of the solar system and the Earth and planets revolve around it. In 1912, Alfred Wegener proposed the theory of plate tectonics, which states that the Earth's outer shell is divided into several plates that glide over the mantle. No one has yet witnessed the Earth revolving around the Sun or the plates gliding over the mantle. We find evidence of those events and propose theories as explanations. The same cannot be said of the so-called centerline theory. There are lines that pierce the human body, and there are target points on those lines. Those are statements of fact, not theory. Granted, theories involve facts, but theories explain phenomena. The closest the centerline pseudo-theory comes to explanation is when it says that the closer you get to the center, the more a person moves back when you hit him. But this is just an application of the linear versus torque forces, which Newton's second law of motion explains. A good theory makes predictions which experiments will either prove true or false. When Einstein proposed his theory of relativity, no one had yet seen evidence of light bending around large objects or of black holes, as he predicted. Since that time, several independent experiments have proved him right. The centerline pseudo-theory makes no such predictions, only descriptions of what has already been observed. These observations are closer to law than theory, but as I've already shown, laws already exist to explain these phenomena. Moreover, good theories explain many aspects of experience, but the centerline pseudo-theory addresses only one. Along with the facts about lines, these authors provide objectives, namely to attack and defend the centerline, but good theories explain versus advise. Objectives only obtain in a system of values, which is the domain of philosophy and religion, not theory. Statements such as guard your centerline and attack his, or cover your centerline, are better labeled dictums. Whatever the information on centers and lines, it is not a theory. Next, the requirements on this so-called centerline exceed the properties of a line. Though some authors acknowledge multiple centerlines, giving multiple objects the same label is not scientific. Perhaps the confusion arose as a result of early authors' attempts to convey three-dimensional concepts in two-dimensional print media. Whatever the cause, there is confusion today. Following are some of the properties ascribed to the centerline. It is imaginary. It is on the surface of your body. It identifies target points. It pierces the center of your body. It is your spine. You keep your hands on it. You kick along it. It splits your body right to left. It defines your gaits. It goes from shoulder to shoulder. One line can't do all that. Martial artists aren't authorized to change the rules of geometry. Now, since it isn't a theory and is talking about more than one line, there is no centerline theory. Instead, these authors are clumsily referencing the symbol from Chapter 2, Fundamental Concepts, which is not a theory, but rather Lung Jian's plan to defend your castle. As a 19th century doctor with military training, Lung Jian would have been familiar with fortifications and the method used by anatomists to divide and discuss the human body. Like him, we have no need to invent new names for those devices unless none are provided elsewhere. First, we establish fighting domain. For hand combat, there is no point in mapping a space in which you can neither attack nor be attacked. You are either in position to attack, or you have to move into position. This map doesn't deal with a space outside of striking range, the space higher than your head, lower than your fingertips, or wider than your shoulders. Furthermore, Fundamental Concepts form does not address attacking and defending with kicks. It is only concerned with a fighting space directly in front of you. We will first define this three-dimensional domain using two-dimensional planes. The horizontal planes are called transverse planes. The vertical planes running anterior to posterior are called sagittal planes, and the vertical planes running right to left are called coronal planes. Planes are not imaginary. They are real and infinite in length and width. Like lines, you can either be on them or off them, but you cannot make them, and they are only invisible until you define them. There is an infinite number of planes, but we are only concerned with those that define our fighting space, and the area of those planes that meet in our map, better labeled walls. There is a sagittal wall at your right shoulder and a sagittal wall at your left. There is also a sagittal plane that divides your body equally left to right. This is known as the mid-sagittal plane. This is the plane most often referred to as the center line. It is not a line. It is a well-restricted area of the mid-sagittal plane, and it does everything usually ascribed to the center line. There is one coronal wall from heels to back of head, and one at the extension of your punch. There is also one that splits your body most evenly from front to back. This is the median coronal plane. There is also a coronal wall at the bend of your elbow. We have already introduced a transverse wall at the top of your head and one at your fingertips. There is also a transverse wall at your elbows and one at your shoulders. There are infinite lines in infinite directions on any plane, but we are particularly concerned with some of the lines that are defined when planes and points meet. Where the mid-sagittal plane meets the median coronal plane, you have a line that pierces your body vertically. Some Wing Chun people call this the center line, but it already has an anatomical name that better describes its properties, the axis. Where your wrists cross middle, you define a horizontal line with your center of mass. Since this line actually runs through a center, it could rightly be called a center line, but there are other centers and other lines, so we'll call this the center mass line. Where your wrists cross low, you define a horizontal line with your center of gravity, or the center gravity line. Assumed is the center head or eye line. These three lines are only horizontal lines on the mid-sagittal plane when you were doing solo training. Now that we have our walls, we can discuss the space between. As far as I can trace it, James Yim Lee was the first to introduce the idea of the four upper gates. Bruce Lee popularized the idea and it stuck. But this is not what the form tells us. Gates is a poor translation for space, and there are more than four. It is more useful to think of these spaces as courtyards, baileys, wards, or as I like to call them, sectors. The mid-sagittal plane divides the space into two equal parts, right and left. The inner curtain wall divides the space near and far. The space between the fingertip and elbow walls is the low level, between elbow and shoulder walls, middle level, and between shoulder and capital walls, high level. This makes 12 sectors. With the space defined, we can plan our defense. First, let's define some anatomical terms. Superior means toward the head. Inferior means towards the feet. Proximal, closer to the center of mass. Distal, farther from the center of mass. Anterior, toward the front. Posterior, toward the back. Lateral, toward the side. Medial, toward the middle. Now, see the sectors as cubes of space. Your aim is to cover that space with your forearm on a plane. The best plane to cover that space is the one that starts inferior, lateral, and proximal and moves through the cube superior, medial, and distal. If you can't do this, the next best plane is the one that starts superior, lateral, and proximal and moves through the space inferior, medial, and distal. Doing this will keep your bridge on the mid-sagittal plane. Each arm acts as a three-dimensional wedge. Wedges are of no use unless they are backed with force, so strike with your wedge, or gate. Since you can only cover one level at a time, these wedges also act as gates. Gates are sections of planes that either close or open the sectors. From the Pauli exclusion principle, we extract the notion that two physical objects can't occupy the same space at the same time. If you occupy this space, your attacker can't. Since you occupy it with a wedge, your arm will deflect rather than block an attack. A gate can either swing or slide. For the most part, you want your gates to act as sliding gates. It is best to keep the gate on the middle level, but if an attack comes above the shoulder plane, your gate can slide to close off the high level. The same is true for the low level if an attack comes below the elbow plane. Don't try to occupy the mid-sagittal plane with your whole forearm. Doing so will open your sectors and weaken your punches, breaking the kinetic chain. An error of terminology is to say you want to keep your center line on his, but keep his center line off yours. Such a notion defies the property of lines. If your center line is on his center line, his will, by definition, be on yours. What they should say is keep your mid-sagittal plane on his axis and keep his mid-sagittal plane off your axis. This is good advice, but it can't always be practically applied. There is an infinite number of planes radiating from your axis and from your enemy's axis. One of those planes will always connect your axes. This is the common plane. You are strongest on your anterior mid-sagittal plane and weakest on your posterior mid-sagittal plane. The planes get stronger as you approach the anterior mid-sagittal plane. When you are working with a partner or fighting an attacker, you don't have to keep your hands on the mid-sagittal plane, just the common plane. But you want your common plane to be closer to your mid-sagittal plane than it is to his. Also, when working with a partner or fighting an attacker, your center mass, center gravity, and eye lines will shift according to his height. You draw your lines from your center to his, and shift high, middle, and low sectors accordingly. One final point. In order to use this map to prevent most unpredictable attacks, you need to keep your attacker just outside your bubble. If you change the distance, you need to alter your map. Once more, there is no centerline theory. There is the law of maps and its accompanying axiom. The law states, any journey through physical, mental, or spiritual space is easier when you have a map of the territory. The axiom states, determine the domain, divide the domain with points, lines, planes, and sectors. Attack and defend from positions of strategic advantage. Now, go try it, and have fun. As always, thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and support, and I'll see you next time.